So I was talking to Kevin at the meeting or at the buffet, right? Banquet, that's the word I'm looking for, about national weather balloons and chasing them. And so I got more detail in the presentation, but basically out of Buffalo, twice a day, they launch a weather balloon. And a bunch of us crackpots who are interested set up receiving stations to receive those balloons when they're launched and track them. And so this is actually live, which you can't see because
I'm sorry.
she's working on
trying
it.
to get rid of the picture heads.
So this is a live image of the weather balloon that was launched out of Buffalo this evening. So the Buffalo National Weather Service office is at the airport there, if you're not familiar. And they launched a balloon, and I'm on a website that's basically gathering telemetry from a bunch of receive stations around the state. And the balloon right now is here floating over Geneseo. And you see it's got a balloon icon. That means it's still climbing. It's a latex balloon after it pops, and it's predicted to pop. This little black thing here is the predicted burst. So the balloon is traveling this way from Buffalo. It hooked here. That's probably around 60,000 feet. It's going back west. Around here, it's going to pop, and then it's going to descend. And this beyond here, everything sort of beyond the balloon is a prediction about where they expect it to land. And it's expected to land over here near Canandaigua Lake. So this is live telemetry, and you can see the little green lines popping on here. My friend Tori in Canandaigua's got a receive station, this green dot here. This gold dot over here is my receive station. And you'll occasionally see a little green line pop up. Oh, there it was. It just flew by. If I click on this balloon over on the left-hand side, you get a bunch of data about it. And right now it's at 29,000 meters and climbing. It's got the coordinates, it's got the battery value, what frequency it's broadcasting on, how many satellites it sees, what model of radiosonde it is, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And all the receive stations listed down below. And it looks like there's about 8 or 9 of them here in this group of receive stations, including mine. So people have made a hobby out of following these balloons, chasing them, and then after they land on the ground, going and collecting the radiosondes. And it's turning into a kind of popular hobby. There's a Facebook group for it, and people post their victory pictures and stuff. And so that's a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. All right, so a little bit about me. I think everybody here knows me, but IT guy by day. I'm in the high altitude advisor for the Amateur Radio Club at Cornell. So we tend to do a lot of balloon stuff at Cornell because the students enjoy doing it as well. And we collaborate with the Space Science Department on satellite projects and Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. We've done some stuff with. We've launched payloads for them of soil samples to launch to high altitude and see how high altitude impacts the soil. And the students love building kits and learning how to solder. I've probably taught more Cornell students how to solder than the university has. And I've also mentored, Jules and I both mentored some high schools. I've worked with Pittsford and with Olean high schools, helping people who do balloon stuff there. So about radiosondes. So twice a day out of all the National Weather Service offices in the United States, there's 92 sites in the US plus another 10 in the Caribbean, they launch a weather balloon, usually at midnight Greenwich time and noon Greenwich time. Right up until about a week or two ago, where it seems certain parties are deciding that is waste. But we're hoping that it doesn't remain waste and that we still have a government in a while and they'll keep launching these. But the balloons right now are launched twice a day. Telemetry is collected by the receive stations who run stuff. We get the wind speed, direction, atmospheric data, stuff like that. So the National Weather Service uses all that data for predicting weather. So this is the data they get from these balloons that are launched every day, predicts the weather when you turn on the TV and they say it's going to snow tomorrow. The data is collected from these balloons. That's how they know that stuff. The launches are coordinated at a specific time globally so that they sort of get a snapshot of the entire atmosphere at one time, which is why they launch them according to Greenwich Mean Time or universal coordinated. And the National Weather Service kind of collects the data on the ascent up to a certain altitude, and beyond that, they don't care. So after that, they stop caring about the data, and the balloon continues up, it pops, it falls down. They ignore everything about it after that. So it used to be, yeah.
And so the payload at the end is just disposable?
Yep.
They're cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and in fact, I've got some show and tell, I'll show you what they look like in a minute. They used to be labeled and they would fly them with the return address label on it and a little baggie. And you could put it in the baggie and mail it back to the Weather Service, but they don't even want them anymore. They're so cheap to make nowadays that it would cost them more to refurbish them than it would cost just to buy new ones.
So China?
No, actually, I forget where Graz are made. Vasela are in Europe, like Norway or somewhere. I forget where. So, you know, these have been flown, and a guy that I know, a friend of mine from Australia, is a guy who wrote some software called AutoRx, which is basically an automatic receiver for weather sondes. And he and some friends in Australia started a project to receive the weather sonde data and send it to a central website. And it has grown and grown, and AutoRx has gotten more and more popular. So where there used to be dozens of receive sites, now there are dozens of receive sites per state collecting this data, which makes it fun for hobbyists like to chase them. And in fact, among the list of their Elmark Keebler, Arnie is somebody in Ohio who loves to chase the radiosondes, and maybe he'll chime in about his experience later. But he's collected. So here's a map of the launch sites in the US. In New York, they launch out of Buffalo and Albany daily. There are also other launch sites in New York. They occasionally launch them out of up north in the state, up near Watertown. And I think I've seen them launch them down out of Geneseo, and I've seen them launch them out of Binghamton occasionally. But usually just New York or Buffalo and Albany in New York State. So here's a launch going on. The daily flights consist of a balloon up at the top. The orange is a parachute. So after the balloon pops, that parachute's going to open up on the descent. He's got the radio sonde in his hand. And there's also going to be, sometimes they put a radar reflector in the chain, and Buffalo puts a glow stick on it as well. I've actually recovered one that was laying in a snow-covered field, and I saw, 100 yards off the road, a little glowing spot in the snow, so I could walk right to it. So here's an inflation station. These are usually in a little outbuilding, a tiny little garage outside of the National Weather Service office, and that's because most of them are now using hydrogen. So they're using a volatile gas, so it's in a relatively well-ventilated building. And you see the big garage door there. So they basically have an automated fill thing. There's sort of a valve on that stem where the balloon is, that big latex balloon is attached. And as it fills up and lifts, at a certain point, it'll lift up and close the valve and it'll stop filling itself. So they've got it down to a science there. So you can see on that counter, the balloon, the length of the balloon here, and the parachute sitting here, and down in this box is some string, and probably the sonde is down in that little box down there. So there it is laid on a table. Again, there's the parachute. That's a 3-foot diameter parachute. Some cotton cord. Here's one of the glow sticks. They usually also have one of these tags on them that basically say National Weather Service, throw this garbage out. So here's the two types of radiosondes that are predominantly used in the US. Buffalo is launching these on the left, the Vasela RS-41. And on the right is a GRAW DFM-17, I think in Arnie's area in Ohio. Those are the sondes that they're sending there. And I have show and tell. Right here is one of each of the radiosondes. So this is one that landed in our area that I just went and picked up. And this one might be one that Arnie sent to me because I helped with some software development for these things. And he sent me a bunch to play with. But so that's what they look like on the outside. On the insides, sure, we can pass those around in a minute, but inside, they look a little bit different. This is the RS-41, this is the DFM-17, but essentially they're the same thing. They've got a battery holder on them. I actually replaced the little wire antenna with an SMA connector. These are test boards that I've been using. They've got a very similar model of microcontroller on each one. They have a very similar model of U-Block's GPS chip on each one. So they've got a GPS, a microcontroller, an antenna, and a transmitter. And they have some instruments on them to collect temperature, humidity, that sort of information. So that's what's inside these things. And the RS-41, actually, they just run it on 2 Energizer Ultimate lithium batteries. And the DFM-17 is on the more expensive CR123 batteries. But they get the Energizer Ultimate lithium CR123s because those work at pretty low temperatures. So this is what's inside the box. So I'll just pass these around if people want to look.
We're gonna take one to Jamie and one to Kevin.
Sure.
Like you mentioned, low temperatures, how, at the end of their data transmission, what is the temperature at that point?
At those altitudes in the wintertime, it can be as low as -60. At around 60,000 feet, it tends to be the coldest. It actually gets warmer as it goes higher above that. But at about 60,000 feet, it can get us at this time of year, January, like -60. Most of these electronics are rated for like -40, and you'll know they're in inside foam boxes. So inside the box, it's going to be warm enough that the electronics will function because those are usually rated to -40. And they have sensor stalks that stick out, and that's what's sticking out there. And that's what they use to measure temperature and stuff. That they run a little colder.
They trade boards with each other.
So I mentioned running some. Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Just out of curiosity, it's considered navigational hazard. I can't see where it would, be similar to bird strike if one of those was aspirated into an engine.
Right. So the National Weather Service, since they launch on a really regular schedule, they may have a notice to airmen out, a NOTAM, about those flights. That's just a standing NOTAM for the weather balloons. Based on FAA regulations that I'm very familiar with, because I do Part 101 for FAA regulations is about weather balloons. These are under anything that you would actually have to report to the FAA in terms of weight. Basically, if it's under 6 pounds, like I say, if this got ingested in a jet engine, it would just spit it out. They're designed to ingest ducks. This isn't going to hurt a jet engine. So they pretty much don't worry about it. They probably have a NOTAM out with pilots as a standard thing though. And they probably don't schedule flights leaving Buffalo at exactly the time they're launching one of those balloons. They're within a couple minutes of it until they get up higher. They climb at about 5 meters a second, so within a couple of minutes they're up and down range. So here's an example of the Auto RX software I mentioned. This is the software that you can run to receive the weather balloons, and here is just a screen grab I grabbed at home. Little antenna here represents my station in Shermansburg, and the red line is basically all the telemetry I received. So I started hearing it south of Rochester. I usually start hearing them around Batavia when they're going eastward this way, but this one I picked up around Rochester, and I heard it all the way pretty much down to the ground south of Skaneateles Lake. I've got a pretty clear line of sight across, and it's all farm fields over there. So I've often gotten a spot within 100 feet of the ground. So occasionally when I go across the lake to try to recover one of these, my final spot I received at home may be within 100 yards of where it landed.
Is this using an omnidirectional antenna and you're doing this automatically, or are you actually
Yeah.
tracking this? Okay.
I've got an antenna on top of my roof, and I got a picture and about 2 foils. I'll show you what I got going on.
Sorry, thanks.
No, that's fine. So the Auto RX runs on Linux, ideally like a Raspberry Pi. It auto detects multiple types of radiosondes. You can pre-program the frequencies that it runs on. I know what the Buffalo frequencies are and a couple of the regional frequencies, but I just have it running on a range of a couple of megahertz. These are usually transmitting at around 403 megahertz, so it's below M band, but a 70 centimeter antenna is close enough to receive these. Some people do optimize and build antennas for 403 megahertz to get better performance, but I'm not going to chase a weather balloon that landed near Batavia. I don't care. I'm not going to drive 2 hours to go get it. So if it tracks it within 5 miles of my house, that's good enough for me, and everything else is just gravy to get data to the website.
And every once in a while, I go get it.
Yeah, twice now when I've been like the day after our knee replacement surgery, one lands 100 yards, right near our house. One landed literally across the street on an apartment building, and this last knee, it's a tradition now, and the next knee was a couple miles away in a farm field, and Jules went and got it. So again, these gather the telemetry, they send it to a website, tracker.sondhub.org, and that website also predicts landing locations. So here's my setup on top of the cupola on our old house. Right up there is a Comet GP3 dual band antenna. I'm literally just running it into a duplexer, and I split off VHF to talk to the repeaters, and the UHF goes into my Raspberry Pi for receiving this stuff. So if we do use a UHF repeater for the county, I'll have to figure out what I'm gonna do about that. But because right now I use the UHF side for WeatherSonde. So here's the antenna wire coming in the house. It plugs into an SDR right here, software defined radio, and plugs into my Raspberry Pi in an enclosure, and it's plugged into the wall. It connects to the Wi-Fi in my house, and that's the whole receive station. And it just sits there 24/7 and receives balloons whenever they come by. And I receive what I receive, and I don't receive what I don't receive, and I don't care. It's good enough. Good enough is the enemy of better, as it say. This is a heat map that you can get out of the software that shows the last packet. This is the last packet of every sonde that I've received for like 2 years. So you can see I can hear quite a ways out there. So, and you know, obviously good density and as we get in close. And hopefully some of the ones where the last packet was pretty close to home, I went and looked for them. So here's a map of, I took it the other night while the balloons were in flight. So this is the national map showing how many receive stations are out there watching for these balloons in flight. So this is, you know, a snapshot at, you know, an hour after launch time, 2 evenings ago or something. So here's an example, and I showed you the live example, but again, here's an example from the tracker.sondehub.org site. And these dots, the green and gold dots, are stations that are receiving. And so you can see this green dot down here is actually a receive station down in Pennsylvania. And you can see the little green line here. So he was receiving this balloon as it was coming in for a landing. It launched out of Buffalo. This was the flight path out of Buffalo that day. And the prediction was to land down here at the bottom, and it was very close to landing at that time. So he was receiving it, but the stations up here was probably out of range at that time. Green stations are just people running auto RX. Those of us with gold dots, mine's a gold dot there, are people who decided to support their Patreon. I give them like $2 a month to cover the cost of the servers that they're paying for to support all this. And since this is, you know, a hobby that I'm active with, I'm happy to give them $2 a month to support that. So I get a gold dot for that. You know, like gold star. Gold star. Yeah. The other thing it can do is predict where balloons are going to land into the future. Since it's using the National Weather Service data for predictions, you can click on a launch site like Buffalo, and I can say, hey, show me the predictions for the next week. And so 2 per day, so there should be 14 of them. And this is the flight paths for the next 14 flights that they're predicting. And so, you know, the other day, this was the evening flight, and the prediction for the morning flight was nearby because the winds hadn't changed much. In fact, the evening flight was near there too. But then the weather was going to change, the winds were going to change, and the next day it was predicted to land wherever 3 is, way up here. Yeah, 3 is tonight. So 3 was predicted to land near Canandaigua. And so, you know, a day and a half ago, 2 days ago, they were already predicting tonight's to come in near Canandaigua. So this is a nice tool to use if you want to hunt for a radiosonde to look for when might one be coming near Ithaca. And so right now it doesn't look so good. There's one, you know, in about 4 days coming out that might go toward Binghamton. Sometimes they go long, sometimes they go short. But this gives you an idea. If you see a bunch of dots coming in near Ithaca, that's, you might think, okay, if I want to go look for one, I'll go look for it on that day, whatever day that is. Here's an example in the map view. You can change it just like you can in Google Maps. You can say, give me the satellite view instead of the map view. And here's one where you see the blue line and you see the dot. This is a prediction. You don't see the actual balloon here. So it was predicting to come into this area, and it was predicting to land in this field here. So the satellite view can be really helpful because sometimes if it's landing off the road by half a mile, you want to look and see, is that topography I want to walk into or not? And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. The other thing I do is if it lands somewhere on a property, I run some software on my phone called Onyx Hunt, which is a hunting application to basically tell you the landowner for a piece of property. So I can open that up and find out who owns the property so I can go knock on a door before I go onto the property. So I always use that. I don't go on anybody's property unless I have permission. So here's my old mobile chase setup, and this worked perfectly fine, but it was just literally a Raspberry Pi in a case. This thing inside the orange one is a little display that you really don't need, but I have it on there just to help out a little bit. And zip tied to it in the back, you see a little purple poking out, that's the SDR. And I've got a long USB cable with a GPS module on it. Usually I put this in the back seat of the car and I fling the GPS module onto the dash so that I've got my the GPS running so I know where the car is on the map. And then I run it off a USB power brick. So this is just a 10,000 milliamp hour USB brick. And I plug it in and it's got an SMA connector here. I could either plug it into this portable wire if I want to, or usually I just have a cheap mag mount, $20 mag mount, slap on the hood of the car and plug it in. And so that's was my mobile chase station. I've subsequently upgraded. I now have this hard case here, and this is my mobile chase station. I just put it in a hard cut box so it doesn't get damaged, but you know, I keep the cable inside of here, but there's my Raspberry Pi, basically zip tied down to a board inside of here. And the power brick and everything is right inside the case. On the outside of the case, I've got the USB is extended out here, so I can take this USB cable, plug it in the outside, fling it on my dashboard, and there's an SMA connector that I can plug into the mag mount antenna on the roof of the car. So my mobile chase station is basically in this nice little box. And I can just close it up and throw it in my office when I need to. So that's what I use for my mobile chase station. So here's the picture of the little hard case. Not yet. The USB connector and the SMA connector on this. And for those who couldn't see, that's the inside of it. Again, there's my Raspberry Pi with the SDR, the software defined radio, USB cable that goes to that external plug. I've actually got mine kind of tricked out. I've got a 3-position switch here. So this is actually set up. It can receive, it can run auto RX to receive weather balloons, or I can click that switch to receive Chorus binary, which is what I use for tracking balloons when we launch our own balloons, or I can click it to another position and it'll boot up an APRS receive iGate. So for the next bike ride, if I'm positioned where I was this year, we're kind of in a dead zone up at the north end of the lake where people's cars were beaconing, but nobody was receiving and digying. I can just click the switch to APRS, boot this up in my car with a mag mount, and it'll receive APRS and put it up on the internet. So that's all in one case for me there. And this thing will run for 5 or 6 hours on that battery. The other thing a lot of people use, and I think Arnie uses one of these, and this is a, inside a little plastic case here, is an ESP32 microcontroller that has a GPS module on it and a LoRa radio module that has been basically reprogrammed to receive weather balloons. So I use my 3D printer at home to print up a little case for this. I'll turn this on. Turn this on. There we go. And this is sort of a handheld version of all of that. And this it's got a little stubby antenna on here, but this has got an SMA connector as well. So you could unscrew that and screw in an SMA connector to a mag mount on your car and use this to receive the weather balloons. And what you do in either of these situations when I'm mobile with it is they're set up to speak to a mobile hotspot on my phone. So I turn on the hotspot on my phone. That gives an internet connection either to my Linux receive station or to one of these. And then these will receive telemetry and uplink it to SoundHub. And then you can go right to that website to look at the telemetry if you want, or there are other apps you can use to look at it. So I'll pass this around. So if you're not Linux savvy, these little ESP32s are kind of easier to set up. You download a binary from someplace and install it on the thing and if you don't have a 3D printer, get a buddy to 3D print you a box for it and up you go. I know a guy with a 3D printer. If you ever want to do that, let me know. I printed this one. So the cost of this chase gear, if you want to get into it, my Auto RX system, which is basically the hardware in here, is a Raspberry Pi, an SDR, power brick, a USB GPS, a couple of cables, a mag mount antenna, about $140 worth of chase gear. Again, this I also use for chasing high altitude balloons, and it's an APRS iGate if I want it to be. And I mean, all those things are pretty generic, general purpose stuff that every ham should just have in their toy box anyway. So, literally, if I needed to build another one, I could go in my toy box in my ham shack because I have spares of all this stuff. The TTGo solution, the little blue thing I'm handing around, that's a TTGo T-Beam microcontroller. and that's on Amazon today was $54. I bought those on AliExpress for like 25 in the past, so they've gone up in price a little bit. That's probably some of the terrorists and stuff hitting. Again, a mag mount antenna if you want to stick an antenna on your roof. 3D printed enclosure. Again, I know a guy if you want one. And that would be like $74 worth of stuff. Then that gets you into a new hobby for chasing weather balloons. So for mobile chasing, again, you have some chase software, whether you're running AutoRx or the software on that little microcontroller. The one that I'm a little bit familiar with is RDZ TT GoSonde is the name of the software. I think Arnie uses another one. I forget the name of it offhand. Arnie, if you wanted to chip in or chirp, which one you're using, I can't remember.
I use the RDZ, Mark.
Oh, you do use the RDZ, okay. There's another one as well, but I think the RDZ is more fully featured. I think the other one doesn't upload to SoundHub, and this one does. But you can also, these can either upload to SoundHub, and you can look at the SoundHub website, or you can run an app like APRS Droid or things like that on your phone. So you run some mapping software on your phone, and you receive data is uplinked to SoundHub through your mobile hotspot. So here's an example. Again, I mentioned Chase Mapper. That's the software and that I have running on that Linux box as well. I have a mobile version of it. So this can either, I've got it running at home and mobile if I'm out chasing. And when you're mobile, the GPS will put a little icon for your car on the map. And again, here it's showing a balloon icon, which means it's still climbing. In Chase Mapper and in SoundHub, it'll show one color for the data up to where it is now. And then it'll continue that color as the prediction for where it's going to land if it follows the normal trajectory. It goes up to the normal 30 kilometers high, pops and comes down to normal rate. The red line here is if it burst right now. It didn't go to the predicted height, but if it burst right now, here's where it predicts it would land instead. So it sort of gives you an idea. And as it gets higher and higher, this, the red line and the purple one will get closer and closer together because, you're getting closer to burst altitude. And this is the kind of data you get. You get the serial number of the sonde, the time, latitude, longitude, the altitude, the vertical ascent rate, and it also will show you the horizontal rate and the signal to noise ratio of the signal. How it's getting really good, strong signal there. The RDZ TTGo I know less about. I've never used it to chase a balloon, but here's an example of one of the mobile apps they have for it, which shows you the similar data. It's got the balloon, it's got the projected burst here, and it's got an X where it's kind of predicting the landing is going to be, and that's right on your phone view. And there's, for these RDZ TTGos, there's several different ways you can view the predictions in the data. There's different apps out there and APRS apps and stuff like that that'll work with it as well. So yeah, here's the other options. There's AXUDP, KISS-TNC, MQTT, SoundHub, or you can even pump the data into Chase Mapper if you like Chase Mapper. So lots of options if you use the little TTGo guys. So here's an example of recovered sonde hanging in a tree off the road here. And usually you'll get some of the latex back. It'll burst, but it's usually not a perfectly clean burst. So you get a bunch of latex back. Usually it's half wrapped around the antenna or around the parachute. And the parachute doesn't perform really well because it's got latex wrapped all around it. But here's the sonde and the little tag. And I don't know if you can see the, probably under there somewhere is a glow stick wrapped up in a knot somewhere. So if you get into this, some handy recovery gear that you'll want to have with you, the mobile Chase Mapper setup to get a final location works really good. After the sonde lands, they usually beacon for 3 to 4 hours before they stop. So usually I just let it land. Usually I only chase stuff that's relatively close to home. And if it lands and it looks like it's predicted to land in a field, not in the middle of the woods, I'm going to go for this one. Then I'll put the mobile chase station in my car. I'll drive out and I'll hear it beaconing in the car and get the final location of the tree it's hanging in, because it's always a tree, the tree it's hanging in. And if it's like, I don't have a lot of time to go look for it today, I may just go out and get the final location and then go home and then come back at a later date, but I know the exact location where it was. So that's the thing you can do. So smartphone with Google Maps is a way. I mean, you could even manually type in the coordinates if you had to into Google Maps. If you're going to walk off into the woods, maybe a compass to help you like navigate north, south, east, west. My My usual technique is to bring up, Google Maps on my phone or whatever app to my phone and walk until the dot that represents me and the dot that represents the balloon are next to each other. If they're getting farther apart, I'm going the wrong way. And basic idea of north, south, east, west. Boots, bushwhacking clothes, maybe some hip waders. I've had interesting recovery conditions at times. I took a bad route and ended up crossing a stream that was like up to my chest. This was actually for one of our high altitude balloons. And Adam Menke chose a different route and came in from like the west, and I came in from the south. He came in from the west and walked right to it, bone dry. I'm like carrying everything above my head as I'm hip wading through water. So that was a lesson in look at the map first before you start walking into the woods.
What about Tori if we went on the canoe?
Oh yeah, we once went into a bog in a canoe. A pole saw is really handy, or some kind of extensible stick. If it's up in a tree to hook the string and yank it back down, it's a really handy thing. If you're really motivated, maybe something to throw at string, a slingshot, a potato cannon, whatever, to get a line up into a tree. So with SondHub, you can also report a recovery. And so after you go to a payload, you can mark it. This one, if you can't quite see it, it's got a little icon for the payload and it's got a little red X through it. And the comment that the person, this was like 2 days ago, said not recovered, could not get permission from the landowner to recover today. So maybe they knocked on a door, nobody was home. They didn't want to walk onto their property. But what he did is he sort of tagged it that he tried. And in particular, you see the green dot below that. So that's a receive station, but that's not the person who was walking into those woods. So he probably figured the guy who has that receive station a mile away is going to go for this thing. Tag it to let him know I tried. And that's sort of saying dibs too by marking it that way. And around here, there's like 2 or 3 people who chase balloons, and literally I'll get a Facebook message from Denny Voorhees down in Arnott or down south of Elmira and Sayre, and he'll send me a message saying, "Hey, there's one halfway between us. Were you thinking of going for that one? No, it's all yours." So we'll do that sort of thing. Sometimes these recovery flags can be kind of humorous. This one he did recover. Somebody named Curly said it would have been an easy canoe ride, but the little one only brought half the paddles, and it was in the water, got to the payload before much water got inside. So he apparently found it in a marsh and took a canoe out and picked it up. So sometimes it's kind of fun to see the notes people put on this by Washington, D.C. I just happened to see it on the map. Here's one that landed close to home today. In fact, this was this morning. And we see, it landed south of my house. Hey, how hard could this be? So I zoomed in a little bit. And, oh, look, that doesn't look so bad. It's not too far from a road next to this thing called Connecticut Hill. Well, let me bring up the satellite view on that. Oh, right in the middle of the woods. So it's like, this would be bushwhacking into the woods to go get that sun. And then even worse, I brought up the topography view, and when you see lots of topology lines there, not only is it half a mile into the woods, but it's up and down and up and down and up and down. And so I decided that the birds and the bees can keep that radio sonde. I'm not going for it.
What about the one that landed next to the nude colony?
Yeah, we've had that happen. They land over by Groton, close to the nudist colony. It's always fun to go. So here's another one, Chase Mapper. I happened to see this one this afternoon. They launched it out north of Syracuse here. I don't know if they launched it out of the Air Force base or what they did out here, or the military base. But it's a balloon icon. It's climbing. So again, the red prediction is where it would fall if it popped right now. The blue prediction was where it would have gone if it went to a normal height. And you can see up in the top in Chase Mapper, it gives you some additional information. Current altitude, 6,500 meters, and 6,500 meters is the highest altitude I've seen so far because it's climbing. How fast it's moving, 114 kilometers an hour, so 50, 60 miles an hour in the wind. It's ascending at 3.5 meters a second. And from my house, the azimuth was 21 degrees and elevation was 3 degrees because it's way up there. It's not very high, and it was up north of Syracuse, so I only had 3 degrees of elevation from my house. But this information is kind of handy if you're out there. Some people with better eyesight than me will actually look at that and kind of look up in the sky if it's a clear day or a clear night, and they'll see the balloon way up there. But it's also really handy because with Chase Mapper, with our balloon flights that we do for Cornell, quite often, probably at least half the time, the predictions are so good that I will get to the landing zone and we can watch it land, which is pretty cool when things gone up to 100,000 feet, pop, come back down, and you're close enough to watch it land on the field. That's always fun. So some resources, tracker.sondhub.org is the website that has all this data. And there's a Facebook group called Radiosondes North America. And so I just went on there and just got some screen grabs to see what people are doing. Here's Rance Parker, who I forget where he lives, I think out in Utah. And he's out going out in the scrub in his Jeep, picking up a balloon. And then here's somebody else who found one, took his dog assistant with him, and he went out and he put up the GPS view and gave a little story up here about how he went for that one. So that's it for chasing the weather sondes. And then the other thing you can do with these things, I'll just touch on here, I won't get into any detail, is you can, as I mentioned, reflash the firmware on these things. It's a microcontroller and it's got all the stuff you'd want for a tracker if you're going to launch your own balloon. You just got to get it to use ham frequencies and ham protocols rather than the National Weather Service frequencies and proprietary protocols. So I've worked with a guy out of Finland who supports some code, and I've helped import it to the DFM-17. It was running on the RS-41s. And so now the same software runs on both, which is kind of cool. And you can reflash these to use as trackers for balloons if you're launching your own balloons. And I pretty much use these exclusively now because it's really good hardware. Works for the National Weather Service, good enough for me. And we run a protocol called Chorus Binary, which is beacons like once a second or every second and a half instead of APRS, which is only typically beaconing once a minute. And people yell at you for that. So it's Chorus Binary. It's also a protocol that works at very low power with very good gain. So it's about 10 dB advantage over APRS. So that's what I use for high altitude balloon tracking. And so I'll take either of these kind of devices and put that software on. And free trackers for all from the sky twice a day. All I got to go is pick them up and reprogram. So, however, reprogramming them is not for the faint of heart. As Arnie will tell you, he's been sending me Facebook messages on and off the last couple of days. He's not a Linux heavy, so he's like, "Hey, Mike, what about this? I don't want to do that." And I've been helping him get through that. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but Arnie, do you want to talk a little bit about what kind of stuff you're finding up in Ohio and give a little bit of background about how many you found? You're more an avid hunter than I am.
Sure, I'd be glad to. We tracked the DFM-17 radiosondes out of Wilmington, Ohio, which is about 12 miles from where I live. And like Mike said, there are real good hardware for reprogramming for a lot of different uses. I do ultra high altitude model rockets that we launch out in the desert. I work with student groups and we program these radiosondes to ham radio frequencies and send them up as trackers. We've put them on robots inside of rockets that come down on parachutes. It's a real good learning and teaching tool for both the learner, me, and the teacher who becomes me through Mike's teaching. I agree with Mike. Reprogramming the sonde is Linux heavy, and I'm not real adept at it at all. So he's helped me all the way through. I'm more of a hardware person than a software person, but we work in tandem really, really well. And the teaching is passed along to students in various projects. Going back to the Radiosondes North America website, Rance Parker is out in Utah, and he and I were actually the impetus for starting that website probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it's really taken off. It's an excellent, excellent source of information about tracking radiosondes, about connecting with people that do the same thing. And I would encourage you to visit it and just check out some of the information that people post on the Radiosondes North America Facebook page. Mike, I had to smile and grimace at the same time. Mike showed you the breakdown on the cost of the equipment. What he didn't put up there was the fuel cost once you become addicted to radiosonde chasing. You'll find yourself going after 2 or 3 or 4 at a time. When we had the solar eclipse, there were university teams positioned all along the eclipse line, launching radiosondes every hour. And this region was littered with them. And we picked up probably 14 in the matter of about 6 hours.
The
But we
map
covered.
looked insane that day with all the balloons in the air. It just looked crazy. I think the eclipse was really just all the balloons obscuring the sun.
I never thought of that. But it's interesting. And one thing that Mike didn't mention is the people that you meet. I've met Mike by way of radiosonde tracking, and he's become a really, really good partner and friend in the venture. But once you get out to the field and to track them down, they land anywhere and everywhere. You meet the most wonderful people. They're curious. I've had farmers take me 2 miles across a field on their 4-wheeler, on their tractor. I had a woman in a small town try to adopt both my dog and I because it landed in her yard. And we've made some good friendships by people that we've met when we chase radiosondes. We send vegetable seeds back and forth and cards every now and then. So it's a real good social event because you never know where the doggone thing's going to land, and you never know who's going to be there when it lands. So I would encourage you to give it a go. Mike's a real good resource on this. He knows it from top to bottom. And again, I would encourage you to go to the Radiosonde North America Facebook page and connect with some people there, because they're folks like you and me, and they're all around you up in that area. Thank you.
Thanks, Arnie. Anybody else got any other questions? If we can have a, we can get out of here.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
There you go.